From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made in 1751, when Benjamin Franklin wrote to express his fears about German immigrants who were arriving in big numbers. He worried that they would come to outnumber the English founders, that they would refuse to assimilate, that they would not learn English. He wrote, quote, "Why should the Palatine Boers be suffered to swarm into our settlements and, by herding together, establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens, who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of us, our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion?" End quote. That's Ben Franklin. Really, you can imagine that being any number of political podcasters today. As Dr. Nora Rubel writes in her new book, the question of American identity and culture has always been contested. Her book is about, on the surface, a cookbook. More than that, it is an exploration of culture and assimilation and the way certain customs melt into others. And for me, it was the story of a massively influential piece of American culture that I had never heard of until her book. So her book is called Recipes from the Melting Pot, The Lives of the Settlement Cookbook. So what was the Settlement Cookbook? Well, it was first published in 1901. It was a collection of recipes aimed perhaps at housewives who might brush up on their skills in the kitchen to impress their husbands, or for women looking to find a man. Rubel writes that it was ostensibly multi-ethnic and ostensibly non-denominational, but Jewish immigrants could discern the very Jewish roots and ideas, even if most other readers could not. And that is how the Settlement Cookbook ended up needing 40 printings, sold more than 2 million copies. It's also how it ended up becoming a touchstone for Jewish immigrants looking to Americanize, while also becoming popular with non-immigrants. This is one of the really interesting and smart books we've had the pleasure to come across our desk in a long time. Rubel is the author of Recipes for the Melting Pot, The Lives of the Settlement Cookbook. It is out now. Have you?
Hi, Evan. It's nice to be back.
I didn't know how to write an intro on this. I mean, like, this book is about so many different things. It's so interesting. I know it's been a long process, but when did you know the Settlement Cookbook?
So, a little over 20 years ago. Other stuff between how I actually started working on it. It's been about 14 years. I learned about the Settlement Cookbook. I'm Jewish. I'm American. My parents were not the kind of thing that got passed down. I read about it in a bunch of memoirs when I was looking at immigration and particularly when it came to Jews. So I thought, because I was also really interested in food studies, there's a lot of work on food and religion.
Look, people aren't going to read this as a Jewish cookbook, but we're going to Americanize Jews with this. I mean, was that like part of the intent? Or did that kind of spin out of the success of the book?
Okay, so the book itself came out of this cooking class, right, that was actually directed towards Jewish immigrants. So Kander ran the settlement house in Milwaukee. It was a specifically Jewish settlement. Not all settlement houses had religious affiliations, but some of them were a little uncomfortable for some Jewish immigrants because either they, required kosher food or they spoke Yiddish and felt kind of like that wasn't taken seriously as a language. And so there were Jewish settlement houses that popped up all over the country. So this particular cooking class was meant for Jewish immigrants in Milwaukee, and it was a kosher cooking class. The kitchen was kosher. Kander had the only professional kosher kitchen outside of New York City. So that was sort of a big deal, although she herself and all of her cohort were all like hardcore Reform Jews, and they didn't keep kosher themselves. So they just did this really to like meet these girls where they were and teach them sort of how to cook with American ingredients and how to learn American kind of mores and ways of being.
But the words Jew or Jewish or even Hebrew, they don't appear in the Settlement Cookbook at all. Is that right?
Correct. There is one word, Israelitish.
Israelitish.
In the note before, and there's not many notes in this book. Like, it's a really encyclopedic book, and you don't have, any of like the contemporary, like, words about, oh, I was in Tuscany and I met this man and he took me to learn how to make ravioli or whatever. Like, it's very like black and white, no nonsense. Here
Which,
are the
by
recipes.
the way, every recipe you look online, I can't look up a cocktail recipe without like 2,500 words before I get to the recipe about why this person put it on, which is like usually really lovely.
It is really lovely.
But sometimes I just want the recipe.
You want the recipe. And also, I can't stand when you have to watch a video. I feel like I'm like too old for that. Like, I'm just like, no, I don't want to watch a video. I can read. Just let me like figure this out. But anyway, not that, not to yuck anyone's yum. But
the note, to your point,
Israelitish.
So there's not a lot of notes.
Yeah,
tell me about that
So
note.
this one is before the section on chafing dishes. And so there's something, I don't have it in front of me, but it was something like, these days the chafing dish is king, because it was very popular. And also Israelitish women have used the chafing dish for centuries or generations. And that came out of the book in the 50s. But that I assumed my reading of this is that it had to do with cholent, which is a long cooking over a flame stew that Jews would make on Friday and eat on Saturday because they couldn't light a flame on the Sabbath. But that's like one note, and then the only other thing is that the word kosher is used in the head note over meat, which is just like a weird little instruction of how meat is koshered, and that means being hit over the head and cut, or maybe not hit over the head.
Not hit over the head.
Throat cut.
But the animal having the throat cut.
Yes.
And blood out. Yes,
right.
Right.
So and then salted and the amount of time that it had to sit. So and that was in there for the first at least 45 years.
And so again, Jewish readers will see that, and that's when we talk about like what's coded, right?
Right.
That they would look at that and say, okay, like.
I mean, there's matzah balls in the first edition, right? Like there's matzah balls in the first edition, and there are all kinds of matzah recipes, and in later editions, you just had like a huge Passover section. But the thing is that other cookbooks at this time did not have any of those, right? The other general cookbooks didn't do this.
But there's frog legs.
Yeah.
There's pork chops.
Oh.
There's bacon wrapped steak. I mean, there's
oyster cocktail.
So you've said that the cookbook's Judaic nature was questioned from the start because of those things.
I mean, I'm not sure that at the time it was questioned or critiqued in the way that it was in later years.
Sure, of course.
Because at the time, this is completely normal for Reformed Jews.
Oh, okay. So even
for Reformed Jews,
okay.
It's totally normal. So it wasn't. I mean, the Reform movement officially kind of rejected kosher dietary laws in the 1880s, like in a platform. And there's this kind of apocryphal story of the first graduating class of the Reform Rabbinical School. And this is like a huge deal because up until this point, rabbis are being imported. There's no like American rabbinical school. So you either have synagogues that are led by lay people or by cantors. And so this was a big deal. They were creating this American Judaism, this Reform Judaism. They were, domestically born rabbis. Anyway, to celebrate the graduation, they had this huge banquet. They invite a lot of Jewish dignitaries. And, like the first course that comes out is like clams on the half shell, right? Like the whole thing, with the exception of pork, is all treif, which is non-kosher. And it is, there's this apocryphal story that a bunch of men got up from a table and said, "That's it." And they stormed out and they started the conservative movement. So that's where conservative
But it's
Judaism
apocryphal?
comes from. I mean, it kind of happened. It was sort of a last straw. They were like, how are we saying this is a Jewish event, right? If we were traveling to any country, and we were invited as rabbis or whatever, they would make sure there was something for us to eat. Like, what is this, right? And so Reform Jews just didn't keep kosher. There was a move in early Reform, which we call radical Reform, to pretty much get rid of all ritual elements or what they saw as superstitious, and to focus on ethical commandments, to make this an ethical, more universal religion.
Well, we're going to go in, like I said, a number of different directions. But listeners, I would ask you, when you think about your favorite kinds of cooking, I'm very curious what comes to mind. A lot of Americans will say, I love Italian cooking. Maybe you love, traditional Jewish cooking. I mean, there's all kinds of things you might think of. But the definition of that and why you think of it that way, to me, is really interesting, and we're going to be talking with Nora about that. Also, there are the recipes from the Settlement Cookbook sort of pop in and out of the book at places. And we are going to talk a little bit about what Nora loves to cook, because, it's my show and I want to know. So we're going to talk about that coming up. But I'm going to steer back for just a moment to that Benjamin Franklin quote. I started with that because when I read that in your book, I had never heard that. That's a 1751 quote from Benjamin Franklin. He is very concerned about German immigration. He's talking about, why are we going to give up our communities to these aliens? Mm-hmm. They're not going to learn English. They don't speak our language. They're going to herd together, and they're not going to learn our customs, and they're going to take over. They'll outnumber us.
Yep.
And when I read that, I thought, that is straight out of the discourse, the zeitgeist today, isn't it?
I love that you started with that, because to me, that's sort of the crux of this book.
To me, I felt like that was the core of what I kept thinking about with this book. This book is not just a book about a cookbook. It's a question of identity, assimilation, the expectation of immigrants, the way immigrants sometimes feel pressure to assimilate, or how they try to do that, what helps with that, and what demands culture puts on them. But I had never heard that quote before. I mean, it's pretty heavy.
It's amazing, right? And it does sound, not unlike stuff that comes from our top,
the most popular podcast.
Leaders.
Yeah, commentators.
Yeah. And so, I'm really interested in the way that different groups of people tried to create a definition of what it means to be American. And I think it's just so important to know that this is constantly contested, right? This is just never agreed upon. And as time goes on, the point where people become American and get to stay American just moves, right? For the convenience of whoever happens to be in charge or wants to make the rules. And this cookbook comes out at a time when, there's more immigration than there's ever been. It's the second wave of great immigration. You have Southern and Eastern Europeans, a lot of Jews, a lot of Catholics, and that completely shifts the dynamic. And, when you hear politicians saying, how come we don't get more people from Nordic countries? This is what they did in the
literally the president of the United States said that.
Yeah, and that's what happened in the early 20th century. And that's why in 1924, the doors were closed, right? There was an Immigrant Exclusion Act. And because there was a hope to kind of keep it, not let it get any further adulterated with these kind of darker, swarthier foreign people.
I mean, Franklin even refers to they will not be able to learn our customs any more than they would be able to take the complexion of their skin.
Right.
He talks about the complexion
it's racialized.
Of skin. He's racialized in a way that today, in the 2026 context, be like, well, if you're white, those people are German. That's white. I mean, it's a very sort of rudimentary way of thinking about race today.
Yeah.
But they were racializing it then in a very different way.
Right.
And to your point, I mean, it's not like, after the Declaration of Independence, the question of Americanism has always been challenged. This is a quarter century before the Declaration.
Correct.
At a time when groups were trying to protect their own territory. Mm-hmm. Does that make you... So in a way, I wonder, if that makes you feel some sort of despair. I mean, do you feel like, will we always struggle with the blending of culture? Or is it that with a little bit of time and wisdom, we're going to look at this and say, calm down. They were worried about this in 1751. I'm sure earlier than that. It's been published in so many different ways, but we know that that fear ultimately doesn't bear out, that we are a multicultural society and we are better for it.
God, I want to believe the second thing, but, I don't know. And I think that we, time, God willing, is long. So hopefully we get better. But I think that also history shows us that we don't always get better. And, it's cyclical, right? And when the pendulum swings too far to the left, there's a backlash. Same for the other side. So, we're constantly talking about immigration now. And now we're talking about people who are actually here as not being legitimately here, right?
Or American enough.
Or American enough.
Yeah. And the other theme that seems to come to mind for me, even if you don't overtly say it, is, so you go back, whether it's the Franklin quote or whether it's the way Irish immigrants were treated or Italian immigrants were treated, on and on it goes. But you sort of wonder, why do groups, and I'm not trying to allay sort of or assign any sort of individual blame, I'm more talking broadly, why would groups that have been oppressed, like actually really oppressed, once with the passage of time they gain power, turn around and engage in that kind of oppression to others?
Yeah, I mean, that is something that personally baffles me, but you see time and time again, right? J.D. Vance is a Catholic, right? Catholicism was so despised in the United States in the 19th century. It was demonized in incredibly dark ways. I just think, why don't we learn from that? Or do we learn the wrong things from that, Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's about whiteness in the way that America defines it or tends to define it. You have all these books like how the Irish became white, how the Italians became white, how the Jews became white, right? That it is a process of becoming white. There are people who live in this country who don't have the privilege of becoming white. But in the early 20th century, late 19th century, the term "the melting pot" comes from a play by Israel Zangwill, and in one phrase where he's talking about it, he says all the races of Europe are coming together, right? So they were all seen as different races. I mean, I think Jews stopped using the term race to define to refer to themselves only after the Holocaust. And we all kind of moved into ethnicity as like a term that was used.
No, but in the way that Franklin would have said in 1751, well, we're English descended.
Right.
Or we're English. And we're not German.
We're not
That's
German.
A different race.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then you have this like push and pull where you have people saying, no, America is an Anglo-Saxon Protestant country. And then people saying, no, it's a pluralistic country. We have all kinds of different nationalities here, and they're all providing something. And so you have these different kind of theorists. I was looking at the idea of the melting pot or cultural pluralism, and both of them kind of are looking for ways to make Jews have a spot in America, right? So if you can kind of create the idea that America is made up of a lot of different types of people, then there's a place for you. And so when I was looking at what Candor was doing with this cookbook, I kind of thought, she is sort of functionally, it's not that there are just Jewish recipes in here.
Right.
There's Italian recipes, there's French recipes, there's Spanish recipes. And, on one page in the first edition, you've got matzo balls and mulligatawny on the same page, right? Which I love, 1901. And so I felt like she was doing something really practical, like a practical culinary pluralism, and not sectioning these foods off too, right? I mean, later on, you have a Passover section because that's just useful to have them all in one place. But for the most part, they're just sprinkled in with everything else, right? And there's not like these are French recipes, these are Spanish recipes, these are Jewish recipes. It's not like these are recipes from all over the world. They are American recipes, and they're all kind of put in the same book.
We're talking to Nora Rubel, whose new book is called Recipes for the Melting Pot, The Lives of the Settlement Cookbook. It is telling the story of how the Settlement Cookbook came to be, first published in 1901. If you, like me, had never heard of it, it is an amazing story, a story of a book that ended up selling 2 million copies, 40 print runs. I think they kept printing it in the 1970s, you've said. Is that right?
The last print run was 1991.
91, okay.
That was sort of a bonus, like a kind of a reboot. But before that, the last edition that was printed like through the Settlement Cookbook Company, the 91 edition was like done in collaboration with them, but they didn't actually spearhead it. That was sort of a Simon & Schuster thing. The 1776 is the last one.
I think you said the 91, that cookbook was one word. That's how you know it was a fraud. But no,
That's right.
It's just an amazing story of what was a collection of recipes, but it was bigger than that, especially for Jewish Americans, Jewish immigrants who were, whether they were saying so or not, maybe looking to Americanize. So when we come back, we're going to talk about what assimilation is in the minds of Nora Rubel and the pressures on immigrants. And we're going to talk about some of the recipes and some of the really great stories from this book as well. The book is available now. It's out now. It's a product of 14 years of work, and you can find it. And we'll keep talking to Nora on the other side here.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, working with members to find health coverage for every stage of life, helping to make care and coverage more accessible in more ways for more people across the Rochester community. Details online at excellusbcbs.com. And Mary Cariola Center, supporting residents to become active members of the community from developing life skills to gaining independence. Mary Cariola Center, transforming lives of people with disabilities. More online at marycariola.org.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. The Settlement Cookbook was something that one of the great American food writers, period, MFK Fisher, apparently viewed this as, I think Nora says, an oil-covered masterpiece. And so the Settlement Cookbook existed in a way that it gets a spot in the Beard Hall of Fame. MFK Fisher is referring to it. A lot of people who aren't Jewish are loving, not only the recipes, but they're passing it down generation to generation. But to the extent that it does become a touchstone for Jewish Americans, there are interesting questions about what it actually did for individuals, families, often housewives. Sydney on YouTube says, instead of melting pot, which arguably means melting into an unidentifiable mush, how about a mosaic? So let's talk about what this actually did for the Jewish people who were picking this up, often women, not always. And let's start with the idea of melting pot versus mosaic for Sydney on YouTube. What do you think?
Well, I think the Canadians took the mosaic versus our melting pot, because there is a sense that the melting pot is just going to make everything taste the same, or taste the same as the dominant culture, right? Because if you've got smaller bits that are getting thrown in.
Yeah, I often hear it as a melting pot versus a salad.
The salad bowl, right?
Yeah.
When I was an American Studies major in college, we had a salad bowl journal. So
salad bowl journal.
Yeah.
But what's I don't know what's the right term, or how do you think of the different terms there?
I think it is better to. This is my own personal, view, and it benefits me as a person. So, I can be honest about that. But I prefer the mosaic, of course. And I think, arguments about the Settlement Cookbook is that it dilutes some of the flavor, and makes it too palatable. But part of that is the use of ingredients and the context of when it came out. There was it came out in the middle of, the rise of the, home economics movement, domestic science. And there was this sense that you could be better by eating differently, which, of course, we still do this, right? We still say you can be a different person by eating differently. But there was a lot of concern about adulteration of spices. The foods of the immigrants weren't very healthy. I mean, there was a question also, there's a lot of germ theory. There's and there's xenophobia. Is it one or the other? Is it both? Can it be both? And so there was such a push to kind of tone down the flavors of these immigrants. And I was just speaking with guests that you had on a few years back, if you remember the Gefilteria people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was on their podcast yesterday, and we were talking about the book, and Jeffrey Yaskowitz, who's one of the writers of the book, was saying, this is what happened to our food, right? This is what happened to Jewish food. It became bland, and who wants to eat this Ashkenazi bland food? But in the early days of immigration, everyone was like, "Oh my God, it's so flavorful. It's too much," right? So their whole thing was to try to bring back the flavors of the original foods or whatever.
So set aside food for a second, because I want to be more specific about food in a moment.
Okay.
But in general, assimilation, it's going to probably always be debated, especially in countries or societies that allow for immigration.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear assimilation in the modern context, people say, well, we need more assimilation. You made a little face there.
I mean, I have trouble with the term assimilation just in general because a lot of times, at least in, my area where I look at American Jewish history, there's a lot of derision towards Reform Judaism in its early days as being like, well, these are just Jews that wanted to fit in. So it's just assimilation, right? And that's from other Jews. So, but I bristle at it a little bit because I prefer something like acculturation, right? Like you are becoming part of this world, but it doesn't mean you are losing your own thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I thought Robin Flanagan wrote a nice piece for U of R's website in kind of telling the story of your book when it was being published. And the headline said this was the book that helped Jewish immigrants Americanize.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
I think so. Yeah. And to feel like they were part of it, right? Also, it's not just about teaching them to do it, but to making them feel like they had a place. So, yeah, and could be part of the conversation, right, about what an American is.
And so on the food side of things,
yes,
it's one thing to say, immigrants came with a lot more challenging spices and flavors and we want them to tone it down. It's another to say sometimes cultures, people from different cultures literally move around the globe and cannot recreate the recipes from a homeland or where they grew up.
Of course.
Lydia Bastianich on this program years ago said that she always kind of laughs at the idea when people say, "Well, I love Italian." Well, what do you mean? Well, most of the time when Americans say, "I love Italian food," they mean I love the Italian-American representation of what we think of as Italian food. Mm-hmm. And she said there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that, and that gets created for different reasons. Sometimes a ostensibly Italian food was what Italian immigrants created here when they couldn't create the recipes exactly faithfully back home because ingredients are different or fruits and vegetables and spices may be different. So you create something that's a little new and you do your best you can, and it's kind of a fusion. Mm-hmm. But in the dominant culture, we think, well, that's Italian now. Right. Spaghettis and meatballs, that's
Southern Italian food as translated through,
right. Right.
And Little Italy on Mott Street.
So what's the story of Jewish recipes and then sort of through the lens of the settlement cookbook? How Jewish are the Jewish recipes? How Jewish are bagels? How Jewish are pickles? Let's talk about that.
Do we have enough time
I
for
know.
this?
Let's do this.
Okay, so the recipes in the cookbook, at least in the earlier editions, really reflected the sort of German or Central European, but really a German Jewish culture. candor. And Milwaukee is very German, right? Milwaukee had a lot of German influence. So, a lot of the pastry and the cakes and the cookies, people, I'm not a big baker, but people seem to have loved the Settlement Cookbook for its baking recipes, partially because it was so seen as so exact, right?
Yeah.
Because this is one of the first cookbooks that was like, they made the whole thing about that. This went through a test kitchen, right? This was tested to the point where anyone can pick this book up and be an amazing cook, right?
And baking is scientific. Cooking is art.
Yeah.
Baking is specific.
But according to this cookbook, cooking is also specific. So this is like the America's Test Kitchen, where like 6 turns of the pepper grinder. I'm like, who can cook like that?
The recipes are not long, but I was amazed at how truly specific, like every little detail was.
Right. So anyway, so we were like, oh, what is Jewish food? So bagels, bagels are not specifically Jewish where bagels originated, but a lot of Jews sold bagels in America and in New York, and they became they created guilds, and it became a Jewish art, right? It was associated with Jews. Pickles, also the same. Kosher dill, it just means that there's garlic in it. It doesn't actually mean that it has a hechsher, or has been supervised by anyone. That's what that means. And that also has, shows the kind of connection that Jews have had with garlic historically, which was also tried to be toned down at one point.
So what should I say to a friend of mine who always says, when's the last time I had a good bagel? When's the last time I had a real Jewish bagel? What do you say to that?
Well, it's very nice to have Jewish and good be equated. I mean, that's great. Thank you. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know what one would say to that.
Is it strange to you that that knowing the history that there are going to be some people who think the best bagels are Jewish bagels?
I mean, we'll take it where we can. But, it's interesting, the bagel, though, because the bagel, in New York is Jewish. The bagel in the rest of the country is from New York, right? There are different variations. Some people will argue that Rochester has amazing bagels. I have hosted a scholar who came here with an extra suitcase because his wife was from Rochester, and she demanded that bagels came from Bagel Land. And he brought them back to Pennsylvania.
A suitcase of Rochester bagels.
Small suitcase, but still a suitcase nonetheless. A carry-on. So yeah. And then outside of the United States, bagels are American, right? It's an American food. So depending on where you're standing, it depends on how you see it, right?
Do you think Rochester has great bagels?
I do, and I mourn the loss of Brownstein's. I know that a lot of people out there make good bagels, so I'm not going to say anything, but that was my bagel place of choice.
When did Brownstein's close?
Officially, it closed a while back, but they had a back kitchen so that it was open only 2 days, and you could kind of drive up the back and be like, I'm here for the pumpernickel, or the but they didn't have a storefront anymore.
Just for the if you know type.
Yeah. I mean, I think they wanted lots of people to know.
Sure.
But still, it did feel illicit.
Did it close 5 years ago? 10?
I think it might have been even. I can't believe that.
Back when I was a morning reporter on television, the videographer who I spent most mornings with, who is one of the really smart, knows all of the cool secret handshakes.
Yeah.
Was like, we better go to Brownstein's. Yeah.
But then there was a fire in the building not long ago, I think a year ago maybe, and that really just ended it. I think he was looking to see if anybody would take over, but then that just kind of destroyed the whole business. But anyway, yes, R.I.P. Brownstein's, but I did love those bagels.
So tell me about your favorites. I mean, when you decided you were going to write this book, you could have decided, I'm going to cook every recipe in the Settlement Cookbook.
I could pull a whole Julie.
You could do the whole Julia job, but you didn't do that.
No.
But do you have favorites?
No.
No?
Okay, so here's the thing. Here's the problem. Okay. The problem is that when I started working on it in like really working on it, I had gone vegan. So, but before I became vegan, I did make my daughter's second birthday cake out of one of like the 1930 editions or something. And my in-laws, who are actually like fantastic bakers. I don't really come from baking at all, so it was good to have a recipe. But my mother-in-law followed me around the kitchen the whole time, concerned that I wasn't using cake flour and that the recipe didn't call for cake flour. I was like, well, it's a 1930s recipe. There was no cake flour in the 1930s, but there was still cake, right? So somehow people managed to make cakes without cake flour. And it came out very, very nice. So that was good. The other recipe I've made from them, because I did think that while this book was coming out, like in the most recent moments, like maybe I should do some cute Instagram-y things with some of these recipes. So I did choose to make Swedish meatballs from the 1965 edition with Beyond Beef. And it was great. So I highly recommend. Smorgasbord. Swedish meatballs.
You're a food family now, though. I mean,
yeah, we are a food family.
And we've talked about it on the show before here.
That's right.
How is that going?
For those of you that don't know, I'm married to the vegan butcher of Rochester, Rob Knipe, and the two of us own Grass-Fed Vegan Butcher on Monroe. It's good. I mean, you know, it's a small business, which is challenging, but we have such an amazing team that works there, and we have such amazing customers, and it's nice to be a part of that. And some of the, you know, the impetus behind that, the style of the butcher shop is to kind of create like a Jewish deli vibe. And you've had our Reuben, I believe.
I have. And I can endorse it.
Right. And the Reuben is such an amazing Jewish sandwich that is not kosher and was never kosher because it's cheese and meat together. And yet,
so how
still
does
the
that
most
happen?
Jewish sandwich
So
ever.
How?
You know? I mean, there's not just one way to be Jewish.
I think that's probably the very straightforward answer there.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how the culture more widely makes assumptions of what, you know.
What Jewish food is.
What Jewish food is and is not.
And the majority of the food that you think of when you're thinking of Jewish food in America is primarily Ashkenazi, which is Central and Eastern European. And if if the cookbook had been written later, there would probably be more Sephardic recipes, more other types of recipes. But the overwhelming majority of American Jews, even still, are from Eastern Europe, you know, or Central and Eastern Europe. They're of Ashkenazi descent. But, you know, now it's a little more diverse here. And so there are all kinds of different ways. I mean, Jews are a diasporic people. So they essentially moved all over and brought their traditional recipes and then adjusted them wherever they went.
Yeah, and so I wanted to ask something that's going to come off a little clumsy, and I apologize, but to the notion of Jews as a diasporic people, here's the clumsy part. Partially because as a people, look, there's been a lot of conflict in human history, of course, but Jewish people have been persecuted, targeted for extinction, not just once.
Right.
And so occasionally, understandably, suffer when trying to sort of make enclaves make their way in new places. So I guess the clumsy question is, how important was the Settlement Cookbook in your eyes, sort of as a historian or a scholar, to Jewish people? It's 1901 and into the 20th century. How important was it to Jewish identity and sort of American Jews, new American Jews?
I was reading a lot of kind of notes that people wrote to Mrs. Kander. And she was this, and I'm speaking just in Milwaukee because that's where I think, direct effect of the cookbook was felt the most. And people were so grateful for her. You kind of think that this might be something that would have been looked at as very paternalistic, like just very much like the acculturated Jews know better than these new immigrants. And I mean, it was a little bit of a, hey, we don't want, you guys look a lot different than we do. And we've seemed to be in a good place here in the U.S. There's not a lot of overt anti-Semitism. We're afraid that so many of you looking so different, if you don't get your act together, could make us look bad. So let's help. So there's, it's not an easy story.
Was it that overt with Kander?
Well, she actually, she had written that she had overheard people talking, in the grocery store about how there were too many Jewish children, around, and talking about how dirty their homes were. And she brought this to, one of the many committees she was on, and she said, "We really have to help these people, and it is also a selfish motive. We should do it because it's service to humanity, but we also should be aware that, our acceptance is contingent, and so this is part of a broader project."
And certainly successful, though, right? I mean, it's not the only thing that made it.
No. But people
successful.
were grateful, and there were people who said, we loved her. You can't imagine what the settlement meant to us. The settlement itself, not just the cookbook, but just
in Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee, that we wanted to assimilate. We wanted to be part of the community. So,
I'm going to cite Zadie Smith with this, and I think that might be wrong.
Okay,
but I think it was Zadie Smith in a piece that I read years ago who said that in the fear of the difference, the fear of the other, the fear of the immigrant, the push, the opposite of that would be a push for something representing ethno-states or homelands where there is only, quote unquote, one type of person. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Zadie Smith who said, if you look at Ireland, if you look at places where there are still conflicts, that the gradations of different from the outside might look very small, and yet they might still drive people to murder and to kill in large numbers, that there's no getting to a point where we have just separated ourselves enough that it's now like with like only, that we will always find a way, if we are scared of something different, to find enough differences even among what seem to be similar tribes. Mm-hmm. And so we need to understand that there is no, quote unquote, cure for multiculturalism, that is the way of the future, whether we like it or not, and that we as a society would be wise to understand you are not going to create something that feels safe and perfect and similar and same and free of difference. Now someone will fact check me. I thought that was Zadie Smith, but anyway, it seems like something she might write. But what do you make of the concept?
I mean, I couldn't agree more. Again, when I think about writing this book and some of my other work, like, Jews are not a monolith, right?
Certainly not.
Not a monolith. And I think, even, right, if you look at the Nordic countries that are extolled, yes. And that they're not monolithic either.
No.
And they have their own problems with and struggles with immigration. And they're also divided on, how much to allow to change. But, if you go to Ireland today also, you go to Dublin, it is such a multi-ethnic place, right? I had some of the best falafel I've ever had
in Dublin.
In
In Dublin.
Yeah.
About a minute left here. First of all, as we get ready to wrap here, congratulations on a great achievement.
Thank you.
I think this book could win basically every food writing award that there is this year because it's so interesting, and it's not just about food. It's not just about a cookbook, as we've been talking about. But I want to close by asking you not to describe it in 2 sentences, which I promised I wouldn't do, but to describe what you do hope readers get from this if they pick it up and read it.
Well, I'm a religion professor.
Yeah.
So this might be just like a strange book for me to have written in general. But one of the things that I really love is the idea of having different texts, different kinds of texts to understand religion and religious people. And so I really went into this trying to demonstrate that this book could tell us so much more about the lives of people, as they lived, and wanting to kind of defend food and the domestic as a place to learn those things.
It's not called The History of the Settlement Cookbook. It's The Lives of the Settlement Cookbook.
That's right.
For a reason.
Yep.
And Nora Rubel's book is out now. Where do you want people to find it, by the way?
It's anywhere books are sold these days, guys.
Okay. No specific place, though, that you'd rather them pick it up from.
Well, I did just do an event at Siren in the Sea in the South Wedge, which is a lovely spot, and I encourage you to go hit them up.
Siren in the Sea.
Yeah.
There you go. But anywhere books are sold. Recipes for the Melting Pot, The Lives of the Settlement Cookbook. Nora Rubel, thank you.
Thank you so much.
We've got more connections coming up in a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.